So there were a few philosophical concepts that stood out to me while watching Jujutsu Kaisen. Each character seemed to be living their life guided by a certain belief. While some of those beliefs were constructive, in others it was destructive, and some were still trying to find theirs. However, the one character that I found to be the most interesting from a philosophical perspective would have to be Nanami Kento. And this was just because he was the only character that really connected the Jujutsu world with the human world, having experienced a life in both these realms. And in today's video, we'll be exploring the different philosophical concepts that were present, such as Absurdism, Stoicism, logotherapy, and Nanami's realization of what it means to have a meaningful or fulfilling life, as he went from being a Jujutsu sorcerer to a businessman back to a Jujutsu sorcerer. And just a heads up, this video is only going to contain spoilers from the first season of the anime of Jujutsu Kaisen, so no manga spoilers. Now, when we first got introduced to Nanami Kento, a few things stood out immediately about his character. He was not dressed like any other Jujutsu sorcerer with their very characteristic or quirky clothing. We see him in a clean two-piece white suit. His demeanor as well appeared to be cold initially, but I think a more appropriate description might be temperate. And this is just one of those characteristics of his that I would describe played a role in his stoic nature. Nanami was not one to approach situations emotionally, but rather pragmatically. His speech also echoed this trait of his. The things he would say were not meant for any other purpose than to communicate the truth, regardless of how he might feel. We see this happen in the first few scenes that we saw of him, and it really gave us as viewers an idea of what to expect from his personality. For example, when he first met Yuji, he asked that they exchange pleasantries first. You might say he's uptight or principled, he likes things to be done within order, and he takes that very seriously. Another instance was when Yuji asked him why he can't praise him a little, and he said, "I don't praise or disparage anyone, I adhere to the facts and I judge on that basis." There was a time I mistakenly thought society operates the same. This showed us that he is someone who is more interested in rationality and objectivity rather than the feelings or catering to the emotions or whims of others, and especially not even to himself. We saw when he wiped the tears away from the transfigured human's eyes while fighting against Mahito, and he said he doesn't let his feelings interfere with his work, even though Mahito could tell that his soul was trembling. And to add to all of this, he has seen that society does not operate in the same manner in which he does. And this attitude he has towards this society is a fundamental principle of the first philosophical idea which we will explore in him, Stoicism, which was founded by Zeno from Cyprus. The Stoics believe that while we may not have control over situations which may affect us, we can control our perception and reaction to them, and this is done by not imagining an ideal society or situation, but to deal with the world as it is, with these four cardinal principles which they believed made up someone's virtue. The first is practical wisdom, which is the ability to navigate complex situations in a logical, informed, and calm manner. And we see Nanami exhibit this with the way he analyzes his fights and the decisions that he makes in the situations that he finds himself. The second principle is temperance, which is the exercise of self-restraint and moderation in all aspects of life. And this is probably Nanami's most shining characteristics, as one of the first things that we see him say to Yuji when Yuji suggested that they go all out against the enemy was that where moderate effort will suffice, moderate effort should be given. This is also a very common Eastern philosophical belief as well, which overlaps with this Greek philosophy. You hear things like eating just enough to satiate yourself, to use the only necessary amount of force that is needed to overcome an enemy, not using a hammer to kill an ant, so to speak. Speaking of killing, the weapon and the way which Nanami fights also sheds light on this principle. He uses a wrapped blade, and not just that, but he uses the dull side of it whenever necessary in the fight. He does not go overboard with his fight if he does not have to. The second part of this principle is the exercise of self-restraint. We see Nanami during the first fight against Mahito say he has to be done at 6 PM since that's when he clocks off working for Jujutsu Tech, and as the fight drags on, he eventually gets to 6 PM and he goes into overtime, and at this point it gets revealed that he actually suppresses his cursed energy from 10 AM to 6 PM regardless of the situation, a pact or restraint that he placed on himself. And this is really highlighting the sort of life that Nanami has chosen to live. Regardless of being in situations where he might die or be in mortal danger, he does not break that pact. And when he does go into overtime and unleash more cursed energy, we see him kind of only use it to ensure that he's done with work at 6. Or maybe at that point against Mahito, he was severely injured and he just chose to retire the fight. Now the next principle is justice, which is the ability to treat people with fairness even when they have done wrong. While I don't think this was very well shown in the show and there aren't really any situations to highlight this, I think it's fair to say that Nanami had a strong sense of justice, especially when he realized just how many people had fallen victim to Mahito and he had a strong resolve to exercise him. Now the fourth and final principle is courage. And the Stoics say it's courage not just in extraordinary circumstances but in daily activities. We see Nanami time and time again put himself in dangerous situations to protect Yuji's childhood, as he says. When he realized that the burden of taking a life might be too much for Yuji to bear after their first encounter with the transfigured humans, for example, Nanami chose to go back into Mahito's hideout alone, despite not knowing how strong the opponent was going to be. And while this principle says not just in extraordinary situations, in the next part of the video where we will look into Nanami's backstory, we will see how even choosing the path that he did to return to becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer was courageous in itself. Now we go into what I consider the second part of Nanami's story, which was his past shown to us after Mahito trapped him in his ultimate domain, and Nanami thought about the way Jujutsu sorcerers are willing to give up their life and expect the same from their comrade, which is why he left, or actually ran away. He couldn't stomach this absurd idea. So we get a glimpse into Nanami Kento's past after he left Jujutsu Tech and he went into the world of finance. And from what we can see, he became a stockbroker. His eyes appeared to have no life in them, so to speak, and it was characteristically different from his current dull, indifferent look. So one day he went in to get a sandwich and he noticed a curse on the baker's shoulder, but didn't bother doing anything because he saw it as inconsequential and would just rather live his life without concerning himself with people or curses. One thing that I think was foreshadowed here was an underlying philosophy that he had, which makes up his character. When the baker said that the sandwich that Nanami got from the bakery must be better than the one he used to get from the convenience store, Nanami says, "Well, you are a bakery." And this might highlight what the philosopher Aristotle would call the good of a baker, which is to make good quality sandwiches and baked goods, especially those that should be better than that from a convenience store. Aristotle also believed that not just professions had goods or functions, but so do human beings, and that human beings have a purpose or function which he said is tied to what he called the rational part of our soul. This is the part that's involved in not just thinking things out, reflecting on things, and creating principles, but is also obedient and abide by the law. So what is Nanami's good? Is it to be a stockbroker, a Jujutsu sorcerer, or something else? Is him being a stockbroker the equivalent of a convenience store selling boring sandwiches that don't match up to that of a bakery? This is one view of purpose or function that we could explore here. We'll also be looking at the definition given by Viktor Frankl, another philosopher, later on, as I think his definition and outlook would be more fitting. And this question of one's purpose in life, or even the meaning of life, birthed the whole academia of philosophy. And it's a question Nanami never concerned himself with, until he was forced to. So while he worked for the hedge fund, we see him introducing a new intern, and he tells him that they have to balance the pursuit of profit against the risk, and to just be sincere with the clients. And his boss basically comes around and said they should only think about the company's profits before anything else, even if it means conning people to buying shit stocks. Nanami obviously does not agree with this, and this also shows another aspect of his life philosophy, his guiding principle or maxim, whatever you want to call it. It's immediately after this that we hear his monologue saying he has never been someone with the concept of a reason for living or something worth doing. It makes sense that this happens after his realization that he's basically giving his life towards something that he does not necessarily believe in at a moral level. The philosopher Viktor Frankl really believed that the will to find meaning existed in everybody, and when people fail to find this, then they turn to things like pleasure or power, which were the things that Adler and Freud believed drives human motivation at the subconscious level. And we can see with Nanami, he had no concept of a reason for living, so he turned to acquiring money. Like a lot of people, he believed that as long as he had this, he would be alright. But can happiness really be gotten just from acquiring money? According to Aristotle, he believed that we all pursue happiness in one form or another, but we often look in the wrong place. A lot of people think that happiness can be found in money or wealth, and while Aristotle did not think money was a bad thing, he thought money was only good for what it provides us. He also believed that a life that is devoted to making money is not really a happy life, in part because You're always having to work and having to strive and not being able to do the things that money is meant to afford you. So if Nanami had read some Aristotle, he would have known that this was not the way to go. He did not find happiness through these pursuits. He became what the German psychologist and philosopher Erich Fromm would have called an automaton. And this is someone who gives into conformity and does not want to stand out from the crowd. We hear Nanami say he just wants to rack up his money and live his boring, aimless life in an inexpensive country. And Erich Fromm says that in the process of doing this, conforming to what everyone else is doing, a person pays the price for it by losing themselves slowly. Nanami became obsessed with the accumulation of money and started to lose himself. You see this clearly when he goes to the bakery again to order his sandwich, and just the ambience that was given to this scene really gives a reflection of what I imagine to be happening inside Nanami's mind. It was very dark and gloomy. You see the bags under his eyes. He basically looks like a zombie at the moment. Even the baker notices and asks him if he's okay. He goes on to tell her that his job is basically just making rich people richer, and him being gone would be inconsequential. But people would be sad if they wanted to eat bread or have a sandwich and their bakery was gone. Yet his job, which exists outside of what he calls the natural human cycle, gets paid more, and it makes no sense. This is Nanami's encounter with what Albert Camus would describe as absurdism, which he says exists in all aspects of life. Absurdism happens when our demand for meaning or understanding or rationality relating, but not limited to our existence or purpose, meets the irrational nature of the world that we live in. And it does seem quite absurd that the value of someone doing something so wholesome that brings some sort of pleasure, satisfaction, or happiness to the average man is deemed less than that of someone who is basically stealing money from people and making rich people richer. And while this would be considered absurdism of daily life, I believe this must have triggered a form of existential absurdism in Nanami because of the monologue that he has with himself after this interaction. He thought about the fact that he always thought he was someone without a concept or a reason for living, and this was right before calling Gojo to return back to Jujutsu Tech. His statement when he first met Yuji also points towards this acceptance of the absurd, which was Jujutsu sorcerers are shit, companies are shit, so he just chose to do what best suited him. And this is not just what he was good at, but also what was aligned with his moral principles or virtues. He realizes everything is meaningless and he revolts against it by turning towards the rational part of his soul where moral exists to dictate his actions. In Albert Camus' book The Myth of Sisyphus, it can be interpreted that choosing to accept this meaninglessness and finding satisfaction or fulfillment in the actions that you choose to do in the face of this is what makes you victorious or free. As with Sisyphus, who was cursed to continuously push a boulder up a hill, only for it to fall back down. Albert Camus states that in the moment when Sisyphus realizes the futility of his action, but goes back down the hill to push the boulder back up again, is when he is most himself. And we must imagine that Sisyphus is happy. This is very applicable to Nanami, as we see when we return to him being trapped in Mahito's ultimate domain, and it was certain that he would die. We see this character that has always kept a straight, emotionless face for the first time ever smile. And Mahito thanked him because he believed that he was going to transfigure the body of a Jujutsu sorcerer. And Nanami said he doesn't need his gratitude, he already received lots from others. Nanami had realized fulfillment. Though the action that he did was small, getting rid of the curse on the baker helped her with her fatigue and shoulder pain. The result of that could be that people will be able to enjoy her bread or her sandwiches, or even better service from her, and the baker will be able to continue to be of service to people, doing this thing that brings so much joy and happiness for much longer. This was why he quit his corporate job, because even though he was making a lot of money, he didn't feel fulfilled, he didn't feel needed, and he didn't feel like his actions were leading to any good outcomes for people. And that's not to say that now working for Jujutsu Tech, he's still not making money. Like, he is making money, but that's just not the priority of his life goal. He smiled because the thought of what he does as a Jujutsu sorcerer, as absurd as it may seem, to be willing to die for others and expect the same from your colleagues, this is where he finds happiness. Hence, he was more than happy to die, and he says he has no regrets. He would have died without regrets, the one thing the principal at Jujutsu Tech said all Jujutsu sorcerers die with, and I believe this is what made him an extraordinary character. And this is also why I believe that while Yuji might be Mahito's mortal enemy because of Sukuna, Nanami is actually Mahito's ideological enemy because They both peaked into existentialism and saw that life was meaningless, but they both came out on drastically opposite ends. While Nanami believes in directing himself and his actions or skills in a principled manner for the good of others, Mahito believes that since everything is meaninless, then morality shouldn't exist and people should be able to do things just for the sake of seeking pleasure, which is a form of hedonism, another philosophical principle. But the video is already getting too long and I can't get into the comparisons between those two right now. But make sure to leave a comment below and let me know what you guys think about the different philosophical principles that you might have noticed, or what you think of the ones that I've mentioned today. If you haven't seen my last video on anime philosophy on ReZero, make sure to check it out and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more. And also I want to give a quick shout out to anime fan 1234. I don't know who you are, but you shared my video on Reddit and I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'm going to see you all in the next video. Peace.